Hello, and thank you for watching this Friday morning in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. So I'm coming to you on Friday today because when I got into Austin last night, I had an opportunity to see my former business partner. He's a close friend and a mentor, and you just don't pass up opportunities to meet influential people in your life and you get to spend time with them. So it had been a while since I've seen him, so I apologize. I just didn't get in till late. But it allowed me to actually spend a little bit of time this morning continuing my analysis on two big questions, okay? The first question is going to be about the Mississippi watershed and rainfall and what it would take to end the drought there. And then the second thing is going to be about this long-range outlook that was just released from NOAA and a bit of perspective about La Niña. Lastly, we'll cover the big impact or the high impact system that's coming through the country right now. So while I've been talking, you've been looking at what's got us into this problem. The jet stream pattern for much of September and October was blocked over the west. Big Rex block, we've talked about this a lot. It's sent parts of the Pacific Northwest into record drought. And then, of course, throughout the Mississippi watershed, we have seen incredibly low amounts of rainfall, very dry conditions, windy at times. And while that's allowed for a fast harvest, it has robbed the water from the watershed. What's important is that yesterday the newest Drought Monitor was released, and this is what it looks like. This is the October 20th Drought Monitor. And what I'd like to show you here is we just go over to the change maps. Let's do a, let's go down to the change maps, and let's look at the difference in the Drought Monitor over the last month. There we go. So you can now see that there have been some places on major tributaries to the Mississippi River that have had up to a 3-class change. Just in the last month. And that's not to say there aren't other issues going on elsewhere, but that big question I'm going to ask is, when does this all start to change? Because right now, according to the U.S. Drought Monitor, which the current version of it came into form in January of 2000, right now we have the largest amount of land area in the lower 48, over 82%, let's get right there to it, that has some form of drought from stage D0 up to D4. And we've been talking about where that drought has really been anchored in the Northwest and then throughout much of the Mississippi Basin. And remember, the Mississippi River, which is one of the largest systems of flat navigable river space in the world, which is critical to commerce in the United States, its basin has got soil moisture values around it that are in that 2 to 5% range according to NASA's measurements here. And, just again, it drains 40% of the land area. So we have land area, the lower 48, So we need to just ask this question, when will we start to see relief in this? Because there's been a lot of course, problems with getting barge traffic up and down, among many other things. So I went into the USGS data. I know it's a small map here, or graphic, but I want you to see what I did. I went to Memphis, and I plotted since 2015 up to present the gauge depth. All right, so you can see it oscillates quite a bit, but by far, this is the lowest it's been in a very long time, almost 11 feet below its low stage. And as I looked at this, the last time I saw an extended time period in fall where the river got this low, or at least got close to this low, because it's done it a few times, was back in 2015. And what I noticed was in 2015, by January 1, the river had recovered. And I want to know if that's possible. So that's what we're going to ask and what we're going to go look for. So we did a little analysis on this. On July 20th the river back in 2015 was at 32 foot in depth outside of Memphis. Then by October 20th, it was down here to 6 feet, negative 6 feet. But by January 1st, it was back to 32 feet. So what did it take to do this? It took the map that's over here on the right. So remember, I show you these all the time. That's the October 15, 2015 to January 1, 2016 precipitation ranks by climate district. In order to recover the river to where it was in late July, we needed to have nearly all of these climate districts having their wettest such time period, the 15th of October to the 1st of January, on record up to that point. So to get the river to recover its water in that amount of time between now and the beginning of the new year requires flooding. And we don't want flooding, which means that the likelihood of this river issue continuing for a while being so low, it's relatively high at this point, because to undo it gives us an entirely different problem. All right. Now, what made this all possible was this right here. This was the jet stream pattern from the 15th of October 2015 through the beginning here of the new year. What it did was it ridged north of Hawaii, dove into a deep trough that was off the west coast. We saw a lot of persistent ridging here over New England. So what this does is this draws just a tremendous amount of moisture. We have multiple triggers for storm systems coming out of the Rocky Mountains, and it just produces a high frequency of events, probably in the order of like 2 systems per week. That's what we were seeing back at that point. It was a very, very wet harvest time period. Now, so the question is, do we have anything in the makeup of our current pattern to deliver this? And I'm going to say something. There are some features there. Let's go talk about them. First, La Niña. Now, this particular La Niña, as all La Niñas do, have their own flavor, okay? And what's particular about this La Niña and its flavor is the extent of the trade winds, which I feel like I've been talking about nonstop for 3 years. The trade winds and where the nodes of those trade winds are meeting the westerly wind bursts are very important for us to determine how the momentum gets transferred out of the tropics and gets into the Pacific jet and what it does in the Gulf of Alaska. So, historically, let's blow this up. We know this. If it's November to December and there's a La Niña, most of the time, everywhere that you see the warmer colors, we're drier, which means La Niña historically is not the most favored pattern for removing a Mississippi watershed drought in November and December. It's typically great for bringing in lots of snow to the Pacific Northwest, the North and Central Rockies, and getting things active here, but not in this area, all right? But what is this La Niña doing? Well, again, it all comes down to the trade winds, and I'm going to draw it for you again. This is where the westerly winds out of the Indian Ocean are meeting the easterly winds out of the Pacific, and they're sitting for a while over phase 6 of the MJO. And what we see is that most of the model forecasts keep it there, somewhere in phase 6 or phase 7. Now that's this La Niña's flavor. Not all of them look like this. Some of them are very much focused on the eastern side of the Pacific versus the western. This is a western Pacific La Niña event. And so what typically happens is one piece of the puzzle that we need to break this drought, and that is more frequent troughs coming through the Gulf of Alaska with ridging, sometimes in the midsection of the country. Now, to make this more ideal, if you just want to completely eliminate drought, if that's your only goal, shift this trough here and put the ridge there. But as it stands, this is not a dry pattern for much of the Mississippi watershed, nor for the West Coast. And that's what I want to show you here. The newest update for November 4th to December 4th from the European model is shown here. And I have bought into this hook, line, and sinker. I'll just be honest with you. The model's confirming some biases I have, and we know that that's a problem, but it is doing that, and that I think that the current La Niña flavor is going to favor this. So could we see above average precipitation for the West? Yes. Does this mean systems eject into the middle part of the country? They do. What's the frequency? Probably 1 a week. Will it likely give us trouble with being drier from Texas into the Mid-Atlantic? Yes, because there's more ridging here. So I have bought into this pattern, and I could get burned on this, especially if the La Niña begins to falter in the position of those trade winds. That'd be the first signal. The second signal would be another blocking event in the North Pacific. We don't see that right now, but that's what we'd have to watch out for. The third event would be blocking in North Atlantic, which could shut this down. All of those are possibilities. Why I've bought into this is I'm not seeing them right now. That's my main idea here. So we are going to take that and now start to ask, well, what about going beyond this point? And what's this La Niña going to do once you get past November, December? Because while this will not cure the drought issues here, it will make a dent, which means we'll start the recovery process at some point. Yes, it comes at the disadvantage of closing up the fall application windows, making them tighter, and closing up what's left of harvest. But it at least is going to help improve the water health issue in the midsection of the country. So now we get back to the second question. Where's La Niña going in the longer term, and how are the long-range models responding to it? We've spent this month reviewing, every time they come out, the new long-range updates. So this is the newest from the CPC. That's the drought outlook you're looking at down there. So if you match up the colors, they see drought persisting and drought developing down south. Parts of the eastern part of the Mississippi watershed, going into the big rivers like the Ohio, the Illinois, Wisconsin, these rivers, we could get some better moisture return there. But overall, the main drought relief is going to be happening in the Pacific Northwest. Their newest outlook, which they released yesterday for the month of November, favors more drier conditions south, warmer in the southwest, but more frequent volatile temperatures, I'd say, across the northern plains into the Great Lakes and east. I would expect very volatile temperatures. Even though you're going to see a major warm-up coming now, it's going to be quite volatile. They also released their new 3-month outlook, which, if we can get it, there it is. And this is the one I'm beginning to struggle a bit with. And I'm going to analyze this over the weekend and report to you about it again on Monday. I'm going to look at the actual model data that went into their kind of early winter outlook plus their midwinter outlook. Because when we read their new article that they just released on the 20th, they talk about warmer, drier south, ongoing La Niña. And they put out these figures. These would be the figures we talk about on Monday. The temperature outlook for December, January, February, and the moisture outlook for December, January, February. Now, the CPC, this is a group of top-level scientists. They are brilliant in what they do. So what I'm about to share with you is purely my opinion of it. And if I were sitting in a room with these guys, I'd say, well, what about these things? And I know they've talked about it. What these forecasts are based upon is the evidence available today. And given that, they're rock solid. But I call into question what's going to be there tomorrow and all the days beyond. And here's where my questioning begins. The National Weather Service's main long-range model, the CFSV2, still continues to predict a weakening of La Niña, probably starting in December, but really going in the beginning of the new year, such that by spring it may be gone. We've already started to see some hints about this. Global atmospheric angular momentum, that's the total vertical going up and down and horizontal west to east. This is the whole total integral of it. It's up. And why it's up is right here. And this is over the tropics. Now remember, this goes deep into the stratosphere. And what I'm seeing is this. Do you remember how we discussed the QBO and this westerly component to the QBO that descends is a key indicator of an end of a La Niña? We're seeing that right now, and it's showing up here. Now, it's just the beginning. It may take up 2 months to respond, but it's starting to show up there. And that's why I don't think, this is just my opinion, I don't think that we will go through the entire winter without a subtropical component to the jet stream. And that's the thing I'm going to be researching and studying and trying to report back to you about, all right? So from there, let's come back to the near term. The map got very colorful across the west, and that's because the major system we've been talking about that delivered the pattern change, that whole event commences today, and it's starting to push its way. The nose of the powerful branch of the Pacific Jet is diving into the northwest. So we've got one more day probably of these air quality issues. We have winter storm watches and winter storm warnings here, red flag warnings that spill out onto the plains, wind advisories, frost freeze issues here, and a fire weather watch over here in parts of the I-states. And what's going on here is this. What we're going to be watching is this piece of the polar Pacific Jet interacting with this low right here. All right. So as we play this forward, I want to show it to you in terms of vorticity. I think this is fascinating. This is the European model's forecast of when the main wave dives down and starts to eject over the mountains, over which the next 48 hours is going to deliver a lot of snow here and some wet conditions. I'll show you the totals in a moment. But by Sunday night, as the lead wave ejects, and we're talking about a risk of severe storms in parts of the western Corn Belt right in through here, a lot of us will be giving our attention to this system that follows it at this point. Because what is going on right now is that the European model has got a second wave on the backside of the lead wave, which is here, and this is early Monday morning, that grabs that that open wave, that sharply defined but open wave down here, and pulls it right over parts of western Texas. So you have the lead event that comes out of Wyoming, goes to the Dakotas, and ends up in Ontario. And then you have the second event that follows it, that shows up right here, coming through Texas into Oklahoma, and then finishes really between the border of Missouri and Arkansas by next Tuesday night. Now, the GFS model, the 6Z run, which just came out as I started to record this, followed something quite similar. The only difference is the earlier phasing of this wave, this lead wave, and what's coming out here, which is the remnants of the tropical cyclone that's just on this side of Mexico. And it brings it all together and shoves it quickly through this area. And then here's the second wave that instead of taking over the border of Arkansas and Missouri, takes it right over almost to St. Louis. Now, these are all nuances and differences in the forecast models. The reality is on Sunday, there's going to be a big system north and one that's going to follow it coming out of this area. And the winds around this are going to be strong. There's a lot of very dry conditions here, which we've discussed, which means we're going to see a lot of blowing sand and blowing dust, plus blowing field debris from harvest. We're going to see 30 to 50 mile an hour winds and a very abrupt temperature shift behind this. The severe weather risk on Sunday is going to stretch through parts of the western Corn Belt from parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin through Iowa, and then down the line, right down here into parts of Texas. And I want to show it to you looking specifically at the European model. Performance statistics, the European model is outperforming the GFS right now. So let's go have a look. Here comes the system tonight into the northwest. And then what we see here is that it puts down quite a bit of snow on Saturday and Sunday in parts of the Cascades, but really the northern Rockies where the winter storm warnings are out. We then see the system trying to eject on Sunday morning and Sunday afternoon right here. So see how tightly spaced those isobars are? Very strong winds. At the same time this is going on, there is this cutoff feature that was here just off the southeast coast that's trying to move up into the mid-Atlantic, maybe spreading some rain here on Sunday. Now, at this point, the lead wave develops its main frontal boundary on which we expect to see the severe storms on Sunday night really. And that could crack right into this area. Then this first system moves on through the Red River Valley of the North, snow on the backside coming out of Montana into the western Dakotas, spreading into parts of Saskatchewan and Manitoba. And here comes the second part. Now there's a frontal boundary draped here onto which the cutoff low is going to attempt to ride. So here's the frontal boundary. That's the heavy precip coming out of Oklahoma and parts of eastern Kansas and Missouri. And then watch, here is the main cutoff low behind it that grabs onto that front and rides it out of Oklahoma into Arkansas and over to Missouri. Now that's just through 120 hours. We have another system that's following this, and that one dives down. We have very little information on it as it comes through here, as the first one pushes off into parts of eastern Great Lakes, the eastern Corn Belt, and New England. So we're going to see that next Wednesday. But there will be another system that follows right on its heels, and how far to the south that one digs is a bit of a mystery. There's another one that follows it next Friday. So we're looking at 3 systems inside of 8 days here coming across the United States, plus the system that's off the Gulf Coast that runs north. So we stitch it all together. This is what we get in terms of total accumulated precipitation from the European. Now, if you've got work to get done in this area, and I know we all do, but I mean, if you can get out in the fields, you've got your grain cart dry, you can go. You've got through Sunday in the midsection of the country. It's Sunday night when the storms start to pop here. Then as you go into Monday and the main frontal boundary establishes, and Tuesday when the second piece interacts with it, there's going to be some very heavy rains here. The issue with this is there are pockets here in the Central Plains, especially parts of the red winter wheat belt, hard red winter wheat belt, that we're just missing the rain. We're in the dry side of this system. So that's a look at the next 7 to 8 days of total accumulated precipitation. Now remember me explaining the differences between the models? Because the GFS was farther in its overall progression, it's wetter in through here. The European's wetter south. And that's just an important distinction in those two areas. Now on the snowfall side of this, let's just take this out 5 days. Models are honing in on the confidence of the heavier snow in here, possibly in parts of eastern Montana, parts of the western Dakotas, maybe picking up a few inches. Then as you get into higher elevation here in the western plains, in parts of, and then into the mountains of Wyoming, much more higher snowfall amounts, up to maybe a foot or more. The Cascades with the next 3 systems, let's just take it all the way out there. We could be really packing up the snow here in the Cascades. But just through the next 5 days, this is the probability of picking up 3 inches. This kind of really hones in on where the highest chances of those of the heavier snowfall is going to be. Now, after that, what we don't see is the atmosphere returning to what it was, which was a big ridge over the west. Nope, it just keeps this extended piece of the Pacific jet. And as long as that stays there, the frequency of systems entering the northwest from Northern California to Washington is high. Gets us on a path of about 1 system per week coming through the United States. The trouble with this is that particular pattern, because these systems tend to come in and lift, or they dive down and lift, tends to give us a risk, does not mean completely dry, but a risk of being drier from parts of Texas through the lower Mississippi Basin all the way up to parts of New England. Does not mean completely dry, but a risk of being drier, all right? Now, on the temperature side of this, the warm-up in the central part of the United States is pretty incredible here. Here's today's highs. Now we get into Saturday. Some of the temperatures here are 27 to 30 degrees warmer than normal. Now, we know that the front really starts to move on Sunday, so we'll see temperatures. We may crack 90 right here, and then we're going to see the front quickly sweep through on Monday, and then Tuesday spreading the warmth east, but a lot of cold air returning in Wednesday and Thursday. Now, we're going to see the temperature pattern moving in large waves with each new system that comes across the country. We can see that by looking here at the first shot at cold air coming in at that point. Now watch. See the rebound in the temperatures in the midsection of the country? The models want to keep this particular temperature profile or pattern around for a while because they're not losing the trough that's off the west coast. Why? This flavor of La Niña favors MJO Phase 6. That favors troughs in this area. We've broken it down and sent it there, and that's what we've got. From here, I want to talk about South America because much of the last month has been very cold in parts of central Brazil, Paraguay, and northern Argentina, much colder than normal, while we've been warm here in the interior. The issue is with drought. The latest root zone soil moisture map shown in the background here from Grace shows just how dry things are here. Soil moisture values in the 2 to 5% range. We then see as you come over toward Cordoba that the long-term drought issues, even though there's been some recent rainfall, has not undone the large deficits. Same thing over toward Buenos Aires. Now as we look out there over the next 10 days, the newest runs favor much better rains north. This is going to really push planting pace along. But they've now anchored more drier conditions here, and the rain that we had been talking about possibly coming into Argentina next week, the latest model runs have backed off on that. The new longer range outlook, the ECMWF 45-day outlook, just completely doubled down on the extent of the drought in southern Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Argentina, while keeping things wet north. And this is also how things tend to look when there's MJO Phase 6 with a La Niña. So we're just kind of trying to stitch these things together and look for breaks in the pattern. And right now I don't see a substantial break happening for South America. So these drought issues down here, even though there are little pockets of rain, are going to continue to be problematic going forward. And I've been keeping you up to date on what's going on in Australia. Their 46-day outlook is incredibly wet here, where we don't want it to be wet. And just to bring you up to speed, we do have places that so far in the month of October are sitting at around a 200 millimeter surplus of rainfall. This is in New South Wales. So in imperial units, that's 8 inches of rain over normal. So this is becoming very problematic in this particular region. So I'll wrap it up there. Thanks for giving me an extra day to do this. I'll talk to you again on Monday. Thanks.